Hi guys, it's Phil
And Liam
from Die Hard on a Blank, and we're excited to talk to you about a brand new podcast we're launching called 48 Hours of Buddy Movies.
That's right, folks. 48-hour-long
approximately
episodes exploring 48 different buddy movies, beginning with the original classic that started it all, Walter Hill's 1982 masterpiece, 48 Hours, starring Nick Nolte and Eddie Murphy.
And just like Die Hard on a Blank, our new show will explore the influence of 48 Hours on the action genre, one buddy movie at a time.
We'll be covering iconic franchises such as the Beverly Hills Cop movies, the Stakeout movies, the Bad Boys movies, classics of the genre like Running Scared,
Hyams Hive Rise Up,
Midnight Run, Red Heat, Tango and Cash, The Hard Way,
plus tough thrillers such as To Live and Die in LA, Black Rain, Point Break, Training Day, and The Way of the Gun.
as well as a few wild cards that you might not expect, such as RoboCop, Alien Nation, and, of course, Phil's favorite,
Harley Davidson and the Marlboro Man.
So if you're a fan of two buddies talking buddy movies,
Then 48 Hours of Buddy Movies is for you.
visit patreon.com/48 hours of buddy movies to subscribe for the price of 1 cup of coffee a month.
See you in the squad car.
Or walking to the squad car, mildly irritated that we've been paired off.
Wherever. That's patreon.com/48 hours of buddy movies to subscribe.
Raise the rudders! Raise the sails! Raise the sails!
Captain, an unidentified ship is approaching. Over.
Roger. Wait, is that an enterprise sales solution?
Reach sales professionals, not professional sailors. With LinkedIn ads, you can target the right people by industry, job title, and more. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next campaign. Get started today at linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply.
If you're a parent or share a fridge with someone, Instacart is about to make grocery shopping so much easier. Because with family carts, you can share a cart with your partner and each add the items you want. Since between the two of you, odds are you'll both remember everything you need. And this way, you'll never have to eat milkless cereal again. So minimize the stress of the weekly shop with family carts. Download the Instacart app and get delivery in as fast as 30 minutes. Plus, enjoy $0 delivery fees on your first 3 orders. Service fees apply for 3 orders in 14 days. Excludes restaurants.
Thumbtack presents the ins and outs of caring for your home. Out. Indecision. Overthinking. Second-guessing every choice you make. In. Plans and guides that make it easy to get home projects done. Out. Beige on beige on beige. In. Knowing what to do, when to do it, and who to hire. Start caring for your home with confidence. Download Thumbtack today.
Welcome to Die Hard on a Blank, the podcast where we explore the influence of Die Hard on action cinema, one action movie at a time. I'm Philip Cawthorne, and with me as always is Liam Billingham, and today's film is The Siege.
It's Die Hard under martial law. This is our first under, Phil. We've had on, we've had in, we've had blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah. But this is our 1st under.
We're breaking new ground
We're
in
breaking
so
new
many ways.
ground. Exactly.
And to discuss that, discuss this very interesting movie. We have a fantastic guest. Liam, would you like to introduce our special guest?
I would. Our guest, seeing as this is a very specific New York City movie,
Yes.
we had to bring in the author of New York City cinema, film historian, editor, all-around no bullshit guy, and the author of Gandolfini, Jim, Tony, and the Life of a Legend, out April 29th, and the host of Guide for the Film Fanatic on our pal Blake Howard's One Heat Minute Productions. It's Jason Bailey, ladies and gentlemen.
Hello, boys.
Woo!
Yeah, I was thinking, I
Hi.
felt like a woo was necessary.
I'll take the woo.
I need to woo.
I'll take
This
the
is a
woo.
long time coming in the
Yes.
best of ways. Because
Yes.
we have been chatting about this, and we know that you listen to the show, and we listen to your show. your shows, I should
Yes,
say.
yeah.
And so it's really great to have you here.
No, it is, there is a real, I guest whenever I can. I do a lot of shows. You always, are very, I'm a big fan of the show, da 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 da. But you know what? There's only enough hours in the day to listen to so many podcasts.
Unfortunately.
I genuinely do not miss an episode of this show. It is a huge thrill to be here. I told Liam, I started listening out of purely selfish reasons. I had been meaning to listen. I had been meaning to catch up. And then last fall, I signed a new deal with Abrams Press to write another book for them. And I'm writing a book about a motion picture you may have heard of called Die Hard.
Die Hard, you said.
I'm going to write
Die
that
Hard.
down.
Okay.
It's a good, consider it a rec. I think you might enjoy it.
Okay. I'll check it out.
It's a non-illustrated. There's like a, sorry, you may hear an occasional shake in the background, which is my dog coming to visit.
That's okay.
There's a really good visual history book of Die Hard out. There's an oral history that my friend Brian Abrams wrote. But this is, the sort of the non-illustrated, a few pictures in the middle, but a more sort of analytical, critical, historical deep dive into the making of the movie, the sequels, and the ongoing legacy, of the large number of films that copied its formula in the years that followed. So it seemed like a smart show to listen to and to, I don't want to say steal ideas, but to stimulate the thinking around Die Hard and the films that followed. So I started listening back in the fall, and I have not stopped. It's an excellent show, and it's a thrill to be here.
Well, excellent.
Well, that means a lot.
We're delighted to have you. Thank you for the kind words. As you know, if you're familiar with the format of the show, we always start by asking about your personal histories with the movie in question. So can you tell us your history with 1998's The Siege? I have a very clear memory of seeing it opening weekend. Okay.
This was in a pocket where I saw every new release, because this was when I was living in Wichita, Kansas, and I was dating the niece of the local movie theater magnate, which sounds more transactional than it was. I actually liked her and we had a nice relationship, but it was a real cool plus that her uncle owned the nicest movie theaters in town. So we went either to, sort of night before when this is back when they had to assemble the print, and so they would run it as a test and, family and friends would come, or we would be there, opening weekend for things. I was very excited about this movie. Love Denzel, love Bruce, love Annette, Ed Zwick, mostly love. But what I remember the most about seeing it then was, and I'm sure we'll get into this, the controversy around it upon release, around its depiction of Muslim Americans and Arab Americans, and sort of the framing of that religion in correlation to terrorism. And what I remember really specifically was going to see the movie. And as we were leaving the parking lot, there were representatives from a local Muslim group handing out flyers to cars that were leaving on the way out of the parking lot, describing how this movie was anti-Muslim propaganda. I will reiterate, this was in Wichita, Kansas. I was not living in a stronghold for progressive protest.
You weren't in New York.
I was
where you
not.
would expect this. Yeah, totally.
Right. I'm in a very red state. And this controversy even made it to there.
Wow.
And I remember sort of feeling, I don't want to minimize those questions and complaints, which I know we'll get into, but also it felt very much like this is 10 years after Last Temptation of Christ, and it felt very much like these are people who are protesting a movie they haven't seen. It felt very because my takeaway from the movie, which I retain upon, this rewatch, is that stuff is all present, and the idea of, Muslim extremism as a terror threat is very present. But ultimately, the film is very much about the reaction to it and the dangers of overreaction to it. And I came away feeling very much like that was the message, and that those who were protesting it were not aware of that message or had not picked up on it for whatever reason.
It's interesting. This happened a lot in the 90s. The other one that brings to mind is like Basic Instinct, 6 years earlier, which caused a lot of issues with GLAAD and that had similar protests and stuff, and it was like a thing. It's funny. I feel like does that happen as much now?
Online.
It feels like it's more the internet, right? It's more it's not so much people out there with placards, protesting, but it's kind of that's such an interesting thing, because I was immediately thinking, so that was in New York, and then to say that it had that impact across the country and was inflaming that level of passionate protest is very telling. Liam, do you remember seeing this when it came out, or what was your relationship with it?
I think I saw it, but I actually bought it digitally around Christmas time, because there was that crazy iTunes sale for like action movies, and I think it was like $4. And I was like, well, we're going to cover this on the podcast. So I watched it back at Christmas for the first time, and then I rewatched for what I think maybe the second time, but it's been a long time. As I've said before, I worked at the video scene in Duxbury, Massachusetts in the grand old year of 1999. And this movie was a pretty big video release.
Yeah.
And so, back then, the tapes would be on the shelf, right? And so, like, you could judge the popularity by a movie by how many copies they pre-ordered and how many copies went out. And I think most people viewed this. I did not grow up in a town where there were many protests around this movie. Let's put it that way.
Sure.
But I think there was a fair amount of... there's a fairly popular movie because the cover has Annette Bening, Denzel Washington, and Bruce Willis on it, and Zwick. Dads love Zwick. I mean, Zwick is such a dad filmmaker because he makes these morally powerful kind of like action films that also have a piece of history. It's actually like weird he hasn't had like a major like Twitter resurgence, because it's like, and I mean this positively, and I have issues with things around this movie, but he makes some like pretty middle of the road political films with quote unquote the right politics,
right?
And I think he's very well intentioned, and his movies are good. I mean, he's made a shitload. He's directed and produced a shitload of good movies, and very watchable movies. So. Yeah, that's my history with it.
I don't have too much to say about that. I rented it. I around that time, so I didn't see it I didn't see it at the theater, but I rented it, and I sort of have sustained the same feeling about it for most of the time, which is sort of like it's I think a 3.5 star, well-intentioned, halfway house political action thriller that does to try. I think its heart's in the right place.
Yep.
But at the same time, there are things that I think, and then we'll break this down, that are, to use the parlance of our times, problematic or potentially insensitive, and what have you. We should sort of say, elephant in the room. The three of us are all white, so it is tricky to how to have the moral authority to say, well, I think this, blah 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 blah. We sort of have to say that we're viewing it through that lens, and usually it's not something that we talk too much about on this show. While we often touch on the politics within a movie, but this one, it just can't be ignored. So with that
politics
said, I think
are text, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I was thinking earlier how Nick of Time is a movie that could be about kind of like the resistance to Hillary Clinton, right? Like, but you have to work a little bit to get there. Yeah. You don't have to work to get anywhere with this movie. It's intentional. Zwick. Yeah. I read the chapter of his autobiography last night about this movie. And he says in the beginning that he's like, I view myself and men, I shouldn't say men, but filmmakers of my age as having to be political. Mm-hmm. So he's inspired by State of Siege. He's inspired by Z, one of my favorite movies of all time. Battle of Algiers, like an undisputed masterpiece, right? And like these movies that are political first, action films second, right? So like that's there. He's consciously referencing some of the greatest political movies ever made.
When you brought up that when we were talking just before about Battle of Algiers, it suddenly really, really clicked for me because this is a sort of Hollywoodization of those types of political thrillers. But we'll dig into all this in a bit more detail shortly. But let's just get a bit of some fast facts in place.
Fast facts. Yes.
Fast facts.
Love it when the guest
I love
knows
it. Yeah.
the format.
Yeah.
It's great. It's great.
Jason, come back all the time, every week.
All right. So The Sieges was, of course, directed by the aforementioned Edward Zwick. A screenplay by Lawrence Wright, Menno Meyjes, and Zwick himself again. Story by Lawrence Wright.
I think that's worth.
Zwick.
I think that's worth just sort of noting that, like, the Lawrence Wright of it all, I think, is really significant, and I'm sure we may get into that later as well. But this is, Lawrence Wright is not like a typical action screenwriter. This is like a hardened international journalist who, in like I want to say 2006. Published a book called The Looming Tower, which is like really the sort of definitive, like, do you want to understand what led to 9/11? This is like the one book you can read about it.
Did it win the Pulitzer as well?
It may have.
I think, or it may have.
I have it up right now because I was curious. Yeah.
Very significant. Of course, it was made into a limited series.
That's right.
With Jeff Daniels as well, and I have some thoughts around that because another reference that came to my mind was the Comey rule, which we might kind of touch on as well, about the relationship between FBI and the executive. So no, I'm glad that
Pulitzer winner. It won that out.
Yeah, so it won the Pulitzer. So the point being, heavyweight on the team.
Yes,
right, like a very, very serious, high-minded political writer.
Yep.
You also have Menno Meyjes.
I'm saying Meyjes. I hope that's correct.
But that's a big writer too. That's
Absolutely.
an Oscar-winning writer, correct? Or Oscar-nominated? I can't remember which.
He's done some really, really significant work too. Produced by Linda Obst and Zwick as well. So Zwick's got his hands over every major kind of facet of this movie: the production, the writing, and the direction. It of course stars Denzel Washington, Annette Bening, Bruce Willis, and Tony Shalhoub. I was shocked to see it was shot by Roger Deakins, by the way. I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
Looks good.
You're the man, Deke.
Yeah.
for the broken arrowheads.
Definitely.
Good for you, Phil. That was excellent. That was excellent.
It was released on November 6th, 1998. Budget $70 million and box office $116.7 million. Seemed to be kind of regarded as like somewhat of a theatrical disappointment, but went on to have this sustained life on video, especially post 9/11, which is something that was one of the most rented movies post 9/11. You have to wonder, like, what the thinking was there of like whether that you can draw your own conclusions as to whether that was sort of a positive or a negative thing.
Right.
But those are some of the fast facts just to place this in its historical context. Let's move on to our next section, which of the show, and I feel like maybe Jason might, as our guest, he might want to tee up this section where we analyze the connections between the movie that we're discussing and the original 1998 classic in a section that we like to call
Die Hard DNA.
Yeah!
That's how you know you're in the right place.
That's how you know.
Fantastic. So now
God,
the first
it's so
one,
stupid that people.
it's amazing, but it makes me feel so seen. It's like it's all worth it somehow.
I said one stupid thing 2 years ago, and it's repeated. I love it. The internet, ladies and gentlemen.
So, right out the gate, this is a 20th Century Fox movie, a Siege movie, and a Bruce Willis movie. So there's 3 boxes ticked straight out the gate there. It's about terrorism on U.S. soil in a major U.S. city, although the tone is obviously much more serious than the Die Hard movies. A lot of the classic elements present correct. Hostage negotiators, hostage negotiations, SWAT teams, FBI agents, all of that stuff. It also comes to its climax with a final Mexican standoff sequence where the bad guy uses the female lead as a human shield and the hero tries to outwit him, a classic action movie trope. Die Hard with a Vengeance DNA, not only the New York setting, but also the sequence where the terrorist puts a massive bomb in a school. You remember that bit?
Yeah.
So that was like very Die Hard with a Vengeance. Now, I also, and I'll give you a chance to chime in as well, because I know you're also a Die Hard scholar, Jason. But I just want to thank some of our interns from the lab for these results that I got, which were fascinating.
That's
so
why the power went out
guys.
the other night. Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So check this out. 14% speed DNA, courtesy of the bomb on the bus sequence.
Okay.
That was interesting. 17% ricochet DNA, thanks to the presence of lead actor Denzel Washington and co-writer Menno Majors.
Sure.
Yes, that's right. It was Ricochet. Okay.
Both films also feature a scene where Denzel offers himself as a hostage to a hostage taker.
Yep.
Claiming to be unarmed. And 22% The Rock DNA, mainly courtesy of the final showdown / pissing contest, which was also a Mexican standoff between two committed patriots, Agent Hubbard and his FBI guys, and the rogue General Devereaux, as opposed to the Navy SEAL Commander Anderson, played by Michael Biehn, and General Hummel in The Rock. Essentially, it's a replication of that beat. It's just FBI versus military as opposed to Navy SEALs
now I want to
versus
watch
Marines.
The Rock. Now I just want to watch The Rock.
But what I also think, the reason I wanted to bring up The Rock as well, in addition to that sort of superficial comparison of that last scene and that last kind of showdown, is that it also, it's an FBI versus military scenario on US soil, and both films deal with domestic terrorism and different interpretations of patriotism.
Right.
Which I think is an idea that we did a deep dive on in our episode, and I think that's what this film is wrestling with. Do you guys have anything to add for our Die Hard DNA section, or anything that occurred to you about any of this?
I mean, one thing that I definitely want to cover, again, I feel like I'm just like bookmarking everything for later, but I feel, that Rock connection hadn't occurred to me, but now that you've made it, very common ground between the Ed Harris character in The Rock and the Bruce Willis character in this one. The complexity of the villainy, the nuance of someone who, at least initially, has a lot of things to say that we can agree with, and how that sort of complicates the traditional good versus evil, black versus white kind of narrative, I think is really interesting. The only other thing I was going to say was that, I was specifically in the, for lack of a better word, action beats of this movie. I think there's a lot of common ground with that terrific opening of Die Hard with a Vengeance, with the summer in the city that culminates in the sort of surprise explosion at Bonwit Teller. I think that sort of aesthetic is very present in the sort of shock and surprise aspect of the bombing scenes in this one.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. So another movie that, like, again, it feels like beyond the Bruce Willis thing might be a bit of a stretch, but once we take it to the lab and the interns do their thing, they're very good.
Yes,
they know their stuff.
Well, and one of the things that my favorite thing about Die Hard with a Vengeance is, like, and I've said this a million times, but is the working class nature of the first responders, the police, the firefighters, like it, the kind of ethnic quality. It's Christmas, you can still City Hall, like that thing about this movie. And like one of the things that this movie is a little more hermetically sealed in that way, because it doesn't have that kind. It doesn't have the room for that kind of flavor.
Sure,
but if I lived in Brooklyn for a long time, and I lived pretty close to Atlantic Avenue, where there's a huge community of Muslim restaurants, of stores. Like you hear they're called a prayer when you live there. It's just like in the fabric, and that's a big thing with Die Hard with a Vengeance. Is one of the great New York movies, maybe the great New York action movie, with Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3 on that list as well. So like the sort of like ethnic reality and the cultures commingling in this movie, which it doesn't do enough of, in my opinion.
Right.
That's Die Hard with a Vengeance DNA a little bit as well.
Yeah. Cool. Well, we can dig into all of the stuff that we've been putting a pin in much more detail when we come back after this quick break.
Instacart is on a mission to have you not leave the couch this basketball season. Because between the pregame rituals and the postgame interviews, it can be difficult to find time for everything else. So let Instacart take care of your game day snacks or weekly restocks and get delivery in as fast as 30 minutes. Because we hear it's bad luck to be hungry on game day. So download the Instacart app today and enjoy $0 delivery fees on your first 3 orders. Service fees apply for 3 orders and 14 days, excludes restaurants.
Raise the rudders! Raise the sails! Raise the sails!
Captain, an unidentified ship is approaching. Over.
Roger. Wait, is that an enterprise sales solution?
Reach sales professionals, not professional sailors. With LinkedIn ads, you can target the right people by industry, job title, and more. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next campaign. Get started today at linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply.
And we're back.
How was your break?
How was your break? Liam, how was your break?
It was a great break. I had a great break. I chatted with Phil. I lied to him, actually, about not asking him how his break was. It was a very good
Then
break.
I have to come up with something that I haven't rigorously scripted or that's been scientific
Good
lab
Lord.
results. And that's
Yeah.
not
Hey,
easy.
you're
That's
good
not nice.
on your feet. You can move. You can
That's
do
not
it.
nice.
All right. I'm sorry.
We're back with our the main event, really, which is Anatomy of an Action Movie, where we explore the tenets.
We live in a Twilight world.
There you go.
Yeah, there it is.
We'll throw those alley-oops.
And there are no
You
friends
slam
at
'em.
dusk. I'm gonna do the other line this time.
Yeah. Of an action motion picture. The first one being the premise. So the premise of the siege is as follows, and then we can have carte blanche to really sort of pull this apart and dig into it. So after a spate of terrorist attacks in New York City, dedicated FBI special agent Anthony Hubbard, Denzel Washington, reluctantly teams up with mysterious CIA operative Elise Kraft, Annette Bening, in an attempt to find the terrorist cells responsible. However, when the attacks continue and then begin to increase in scale and destruction, a growing climate of fear leads the president to authorize General William Devereaux, Bruce Willis, to deploy martial law on the streets of New York. And the ticking clock is, can Hub and his colleagues find the last terrorist cell before another potentially disastrous terrorist attack, or before the city of New York sinks further into an unrecognizable fascist state? So, with all that said, I'm going to sort of yield the floor to Mr. Bailey, Senator Bailey. What's in
We
your,
were a democracy last time I checked.
Amazing. Just give us your, what are your feelings about this movie? What's it about thematically? What do you like it? Well, just give us your big ticket thoughts and let's kind of kick this one around. So go ahead.
Your 3.5 star attribution. That's like, I literally, when this movie came out on DVD in, I want to say on Blu-ray in 2007 or 2008, and had maybe like the ugliest Blu-ray cover I've ever seen.
Is that the martial law edition?
It's not the martial law edition.
Rude title
that seems off color to me. But
I agree.
Yeah, I gave it, when I reviewed it for DVD Talk, one of my first outlets, I gave it 3.5 stars. When I revisited it on Letterboxd yesterday, I gave it 3.5 stars. It's a 3.5 star movie. It is the craftsmanship is top tier. It is professional, the sort of mid-budget adult-oriented filmmaking that we're always pining for these days and don't get certainly at least in the volume that we used to. Acting terrific across the board. The script is just it's just they didn't quite get it there, and I don't know if it's the mixture of the sort of who was from which world wasn't quite right. It feels sometimes like I want it to be sort of more fact-based, and other times it's a little too slavish to the less interesting pieces of process. Honestly, I think it is weirdly a movie that has gotten better since it came out, just because it ended up being so weirdly prescient of the way that New York and and America felt after 9/11, and also the way that America acted on the world stage after 9/11. The most interesting stuff in it, I think, is accidental, is how much of it is a warning about how not to react to this sort of international terrorism in a major American city, and how much of it we did, how much it predicted what the political, socio-political, intellectual, emotional responses to 9/11 would turn out to be. So I don't know how much credit you can give the movie for how well it works because of what came after it came out. But that, I think, is the most interesting stuff about this particular movie.
You know, I wanted to bring great points. Liam, you said something that when we were just talking earlier this morning that I would love you to elucidate in terms of why this film is sort of a bit of a strange halfway house. And I don't want to steal your thunder because you articulated it beautifully, and then I'll kind of come in with my thoughts.
I think first of all, I think, Jason, I think that's dead on. And like, I think really like there's something a little naive about this movie is one way to think about it. It's a little naive. And I've been sort of like parsing over this movie because it feels, as always, timely, and it feels kind of complicated. But the conclusion that I kind of came to is that like we always view these movies on a continuum, in that every one of these movies informs the next one. And actually, Phil, I think there's like 20% Crimson Tide DNA in this movie.
It's so funny you say that because, you know, just to talk about that for 1 second, I don't want to sort of take your flow off tangent here. But I was in my head, I was like, man, you know, the Bruce Willis character, we'll get to it in a separate section, but like, is he a little miscast in this role, and who would you have? And then my mind immediately went to, God rest his soul, Gene Hackman, who we just lost yesterday. And then I was suddenly like, yeah, but that's Crimson Tide. It's Denzel again. But it was like, yeah, it is. It's fascinating that so many of these movies in the 90s were about kind of America at war with itself, or two different patriots wrestling with their own idea in a complex moral situation, how to maintain their values with a gun to their head, or in some cases a nuclear weapon to their head, or really extreme kind of scenarios. So yeah, I just wanted to mention.
No, totally.
Go ahead.
It's the Van Clausewitz thing that Gene Hackman talks about in Crimson Tide, right? You know, recently departed. And once again, Denzel figures as the like progressive but still towing the line member, in this case of the FBI, where he is in the Navy in Crimson Tide. So I read Edward Zwick's chapter in his book about this movie, how he was trying to consciously replicate Z, State of Siege, all these movies. And the conclusion that I've come to is that this movie's biggest problem in my mind is that it's slavish to the action movie paradigm, in the sense that the only Muslim characters in this film that are given any definition is a cop and a terrorist.
Yeah.
And there's no middle ground in my mind. And I think Edward Zwick did this with the best of intentions, but his response to the blowback of this movie was to write an op-ed in the New York Times that concludes with this line that I think is worth noting, which is, to shrink from any subject because it is hurtful or politically sensitive or politically incorrect or Islamically incorrect is to deny one of the most important functions of art, which is to be provocative. So I'm sorry I offended anyone, but I'm really not.
That's a bullshit, trolly, fuck that.
It's a tough, well, I think the problem is that the movie, I think the problem with that mentality is that, from my point of view, the Tony Shalhoub character, if at the end of the movie the Tony Shalhoub character was like, and I'm no longer a cop anymore, like if he was like, it had the action trope of like one last job, I would sort of buy that a little bit. But from my point of view, I think the movie sort of has a problem where it doesn't allow the characters to be anything more than they are in an action movie. And it's a year before Edward Zwick's produced Traffic. It's a couple years before Syriana, written by Stephen Gaghan. These movies that like sort of sacrifice action to be about the greater complexities of their subject matter. Absolutely. And I wonder if this would be a better movie if it didn't, you know, in the book, he also makes the point of like, he makes the point of like, I still wanted to make a kick-ass action movie. And I think that might be where the problem is from my point of view.
Right.
Because I think he's trying too hard to make an action picture when maybe this should have been a 2.5-hour movie about this situation, this complexity. Maybe he gets away from the helicopter action scene, which is a good scene. But it's sort of like stuck in the post-Die Hard, pre-big thriller action world of Syriana and Traffic. Phil, I think that's kind of
you absolutely nailed it. And I think that's where that there's somewhat of that tension, because you're trying to do a movie like a Hollywood version of Battle of Algiers, or to some extent, well, that's based on past historical events. This is like a predictive fictional event, but it has to be forced into the typical structure of a Hollywood movie. And there were a Hollywood action movie specifically, and there were other compromises that were made, specifically the casting of Bruce Willis, which was imposed upon Zwick, and he has said this on record
in the book too.
By felt that it came down the chain of command at Fox. He actually literally felt that it came down from Rupert Murdoch. They were worried that this movie needed another star because it was expensive, and Bruce Willis was sort of forced upon Edward Zwick. So that's a literal example of some of the compromises that were made to make this movie. I want to push back slightly on one of the things that you said there, respectfully, just from my point of view, which is like the idea, to me, the key to this whole movie is the Tony Shalhoub character. And actually, that's the thing I think is actually best about this movie, and the thing that I took away from the movie that I actually remembered the most. It was the most memorable. Denzel's incredible always. Annette Bening is terrific in this movie. It's no slight on anybody else whatsoever.
Right.
But, we've seen them play those kinds of parts before. You expect Denzel to be 5-star. Tony Shalhoub is like a different character. And what I think is actually very important is, whilst there's always that tendency in an action movie to do the Johnny Utah thing and throw your FBI badge in the thing at the end and say, "Oh fuck it, I'm done," I would sort of say, well, if the FBI is one of the most critically important institutions for the balance of power in the United States. And to just abandon it would be like, well, it's no longer of use. Now, there's a couple of incredible movies about this exact subject. Mark Felt is one that occurs to me. Have either of you guys ever seen this one?
With Liam Neeson?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an amazing and underseen movie.
I don't even know that this movie exists.
It's incredible. Yeah. Almost nobody's seen it. I went to see it when it came out, and I watched it like 3 times in a week. I bought it immediately. It's actually produced. It's a Scott-free production. It is all about the senior FBI figure, Mark Felt, who was revealed to be Deep Throat in the Watergate era. But what it explicitly explores is why the FBI needing to be independent from the executive. And there's this amazing scene where Michael C. Hall, who's playing John Dean in quite a sinister way. In Oliver Stone's Nixon, John Dean is played in a much more sympathetic way.
Sure.
But in this movie, he's quite scheming, and he's sort of initially he sort of turns on Nixon, but at this point he's kind of protecting him.
Wow.
And he calls Mark Felt, played by Liam Neeson, and basically says, they're basically trying to control the FBI's investigation of Watergate. And Mark Felt, as Liam Neeson, is basically like, yes, okay, why are you calling? And he's like, well, we can suggest. He's like, the White House has nothing to suggest to the FBI. And he draws a very, very clear line in concrete. Right.
Interesting.
And another move, because this film is about Bruce Willis being an adjunct of the executive, right? He's sort of like, he's manipulating the highest level executive policy through the off-screen president, but it is Bill Clinton, as implied, as from the beginning, right?
Yes.
Another piece that explored this, and this is again very looming tower adjacent, right? Same writer, Lawrence Wright, is the Comey Rule, which is also explicitly about what happens if the executive corrupts FBI power, and why that line needs to be absolutely separate. And I was on set for that. So I was working, because Billy Ray's been a friend and mentor of mine over the years. So it was that film to me, or that limited series was like, what I thought was amazing about it, and I wrote to Billy after this to praise him, because this was in a time where Trump had just got into power. And when that came, or I think it was, or it might have been just before the election. I'm trying to remember when it was, the re-election, when it came out.
It was around that time, because I remember listening to Billy Ray talk about it on a podcast.
I'm sort of getting short of breath here because I'm getting kind of stirring up certain emotions. But what I thought was genius about that piece, and Mark felt is similar, as opposed to this film, is that it was incredibly restrained and incredibly sober. And all it did was just lay out the facts painstakingly and resisted the urge to spice it up and like make shit up or make Trump be a kind of cartoon. It was, I just couldn't believe the restraint of it. So what you then had with both of those films, or both those pieces of work, more so I think with the Comey Rule, it's like actually becomes a critically important historical document. As opposed to just like, because you can look back and say these are just the facts.
Right.
It didn't try to be too. It's more powerful to not make it, like a soapy and over the top. Right. It was actually just so restrained that it actually to me had like more power. And I said, and I wrote to him afterwards. I said that is like a profound act of patriotism, because that must have been so difficult to approach such inflammatory material in such a kind of considered way. So the point about all that to me is like, I actually think it's really important. I don't sort of presuppose the idea that a character being an FBI agent or being law enforcement is an inherently bad, like you're part of the problem.
Enough. Yeah,
you're part of the problem. Actually, no, you're part of the solution as long as you follow the rules and the constitutionality of what's going on. And to me, that was the other big thing that I thought, and you guys would know more about it probably than me as Americans, but like, to me, this film is absolutely, if you had to say one thing that this is about, it's about the Constitution.
Yeah. Yeah.
Would you guys agree with that?
No, I would agree. And let me take a step back to say that I think the simplicity of sort of thinking about Shalhoub's decision in the movie, or lack of decision, or whatever you want to call it, is more that like I would like to feel in the movie that the lives of these characters are more deeply considered. Now that said, I think Shalhoub is like the heart and soul of this movie, and I do appreciate like the scene when he throws the $20 into the box and is like, well, it's $2,000 now, or whatever it happens to be, right? Like I sort of appreciate that because it feels red-blooded and real, and I like how he kind of like makes fun of Annette Bening's character or pokes at her, right? He feels like a real living, breathing character. But, maybe the better point, and we can cover this when we get to our quote unquote villain section, is Samir's introduction as this like progressive Muslim, smoking and drinking and being a professor at Brooklyn College is like, I wish there was one more character that could give voice to this that wasn't a cop or a criminal or a terrorist, because it feels rooted in like the world of Westerns and action movies, and we're about to crash in America and then across the world, and already have in Europe and in America in '93 into this world of increasing complexity on how we view these issues. And I think that, to no disrespect to Edward Zwick, it's just a couple years too early for this movie to be as nuanced as it could be, is ultimately how I feel.
And I think the other point that you make that's really interesting is, when he's talking about, these Costa Garvas movies as sort of a template, the thing to remember is that, like, those are not movies that have happy endings. Those are not like, and that when you talk about the sort of action movie of it all and the narrative simplicity that sort of torpedoes this, I think that especially comes to bear. Like at the end, like that's just a pure Hollywood ending. The idea of like a person in political power being held accountable for breaking the law, it feels
quaint now, weirdly.
Yeah. When they're leading Bruce away in the cuffs at the end, I literally laughed out loud. Like that has more to do with this exact moment than anything sort of immediately after. But that inclination to sort of wrap it up with a tidy, happy, good bad guys lose, good guys win kind of ending betrays the sort of nuance that a lot of these issues have been dealt with up until that point.
Right. And it's interesting because Zwick talks about in the book that, like, his career is he's in a good place. His movies are making money now. And he's like, I wanted to make a statement. I wanted to, and so it's like, the intentions are all good, but I think just to some extent, it's like, as you said, after 9/11, this movie gets a lot more attention, right? Because it's weirdly like people aren't thinking about these issues day to day. And if there's a piece of credit we can give him beyond delivering like a pretty crackerjack 2 hours is that, like, as you said, like, he says that on 9/11, he started getting phone calls. Come talk about this. Come talk about this. We need you to talk about this. And he was like, well, to be clear, he's like, I'm not an expert on these issues. I just made a movie. And his concern was like, at some point in America, we're going to have to deal with this. And we had, already potentially with the bombing of the garage. So it's like the movie gets credit for that, but it's also just trapped at a moment in time.
Right.
When maybe it can't have the nuance that it needs. That said, Shalhoub's role in this movie, he's just so good in this movie. He's kind of the MVP, and I think of him as the guy from Wings.
Right.
So to see him play this part, this is great.
Yeah, this is 2 years after Big Night, which was, I think, the first movie where anyone thought of him as anything beyond the guy from Wings. And so the timing of this feels like, this must have been like one of the big studio offers he got after that movie was like an indie sensation.
And I said this to Phil earlier, the scene, what I think one of the best scenes in the movie where he's looking for his son.
Yeah, that's the one you remember.
Is the first scene he shot in the movie.
Oh, wow.
With no rehearsal, no prep, is shooting in LA, flies to New York in sub-zero temperatures, and does this scene.
Wow. Yeah.
And like, I mean, I have goosebumps because that moment when Denzel Washington walks into the football field, great juxtaposition of like the way you usually see and there's all these guys in cages. You're just like,
yeah, it's a potent image.
It's really powerful, and it's not like there weren't images like this in American history prior to this. So like ultimately, at the end of the day, like Zwick's intentions are great. And everything we're saying here is hindsight, right? But so it's like this conversation is making me appreciate this movie a little bit more, despite some issues with it, and wanting it to be even better than its somewhat sensitive portrayal of these things. There's one other problem that I want to talk about, but we can get there.
Well, there's one more point that I wanted to make on the political side, and then we can move into a different sort of element of this. But I think what it's about and the message that he was trying to make, which I think is a good message, which is to not betray your own values when you're under threat.
Yep.
Which is a very, very difficult thing to do because the natural tendency is like what the senator says. If you've been attacked by a dog, you don't play by ASPCA rules. You take the leash off your own meaner dog. And this is classic eye for an eye makes the world blind stuff. Right. So for me, I think that idea, and we then saw a version of it play out. It wasn't that the military were, initiating martial law on the streets of Brooklyn, but we did see a version of some of the things that happen with, really, really brutal U.S. policy, right? And torture is actively discussed and explored in this thing. And does the end justify the means? And those are all very, very worthy questions to ask and to wrestle with. And they're not simple answers.
No.
It's a very, very complex issue. But I think his intent, as you said, the takeaway is not supposed that the film is remembered for perceived rightly or wrongly Islamophobia. But I think what Ed Zwick's message was, or at least the intention of, and the brain trust that worked on the movie was like, this is a real world issue, but we have to maintain the Constitution exists for a reason, and you can't shred little bits off when it's inconvenient.
Yes.
Right? So I think that's
Here.
That's the kind of idea that I felt this movie was about.
Not to give a book report, but I also want to talk about one more thing he talks about in the book, which is the law enforcement was very tight-lipped about this. Like, they didn't want to tell him anything. And then one guy came up to him. He's like, "Oh, you're making a movie. Who's in it?" And he was like, "Denzel Washington." And the guy is like, "Oh, I'd love to meet him." So they flew Denzel Washington to New York and took this guy out for dinner and bought him a couple glasses of wine. And he was basically like, "You guys have no idea how much surveillance there is. This is 1997.
Yeah.
There is already happening, right? Like and that is one of Zwick's points is like, the Constitution is being bent to investigate these people. So the kind of stuff that got a lot of attention after 9/11, the infiltration of mosques, the kind of like surveillance state that occurred, like it was happening already, you know, in law enforcement. So it's like, he is, as Phil, to your point, he is really trying to say like, this, we're going to have to reckon with this, right? And he does it through the Hollywood blockbuster.
Well, the
right?
thing that's complex about all of these issues is that it's like we get, you know, without wanting to, you know, get into our own political views, people are pushed into simplistic positions, right? We're you know, you're on this team red or team blue, and you have to like a sports team,
right?
And actually, these issues are far more complex. Like 9/11 did happen. Like you can't just ignore that, but at the same time, it's not, you don't put everybody in cages kind of thing, you know what I mean? So it's sort of like it has to be looked at with these things are highly complex, and I think a lot of people, and the way our society works now is just people are just pushed into black and white positions on things, whereas actually, you know, it's more complex. But the problem with this film's trying to explore that, but like you said, it's just limited by the fact that push comes to shove, it's a studio action movie that needs to make a profit, and therefore some certain compromises are made as a result. But I do really like that. I think the Tony Shalhoub character, as you said, I really love that he's a real human being. There's a lot of tokenism that goes on in these films, especially with like Middle Eastern. Middle Eastern, and we've discussed some movies we like Executive Decision, that are pretty egregiously racist. You know, in some ways, even though the movie is a really great action movie.
True Lies.
I like True Lies, absolutely, and they try and
good movie.
They offset it with the Grant Heslov character, who is Arab coded,
right?
And actually, to offset the fact that the main character is a Islamic fanatic played by Art Malik. Grant Heslov is obviously amazing and an important figure, an important artist and filmmaker, and he's great in that movie, but he's not like got that much to do.
Yeah.
This is a real dimensional character who is flawed, as you say, who actually and hits a prisoner. But this is what's so critical is Denzel Washington. We'll talk about him, and maybe we should pivot into that section. Calls him out for it because it's not constitutional. Denzel Washington is essentially the living embodiment of someone who is a true believer in the Constitution, and a true, you know, it doesn't agree with shredding prisoners' rights, and explicitly talks about it to you know, Bruce Willis, and you know, makes that point. So I think like Ed's. Let's move into that section. The hero section. Denzel Washington as Anthony Hubbard. I feel like that's Ed Zwick's like. Avatar, if you like.
Absolutely.
That's like, you know, would you guys agree with that?
Yeah, totally.
Do you know who he honestly reminds me of in this movie? And I've never thought this or said this about him in any other role. He reminds me of Jimmy Stewart in this movie.
Yes.
Like this is like a Mr. Smith-esque, you know, the scene, my favorite scene in the movie probably is the one with all three of them, with Willis, Bening, Washington, where they're in that bathroom with the naked, bound prisoner, and they're talking about torture techniques, literally all of the techniques that our government implemented in the wake of 9/11. And the speech that he gives in that scene is one of the great Denzel monologues, but it has that Mr. Smith Goes to Washington voice crack kind of quality to it. That, you know, what if they really want is for us to herd children into stadiums like we're doing and put soldiers on the street and have Americans looking over their shoulders, bend the law, shred the Constitution just a little bit. Like that is goosebump inducing stuff.
I have them now.
Absolutely. That's what foreign powers want. They want us to betray our values.
Yeah.
Right? They want to pervert it from the inside if they can.
And who better to signify, to symbolize our values than this actor who we so automatically associate with righteousness and goodness and justice. You know, that's part of the reason why a few years later it was such a shock when he was so great in Training Day. The thing that people forget about that movie was that's the first time he'd really played a villain since he was coming up. You know, he had so embodied our goodness that to see
Yeah.
him in that villainous role was a real shocker. So
Yes, the virtues we aspire to,
Yes.
he embodies.
Yes.
Well, and Crimson Tide, and then he makes Gladiator 2 this year, which is like which he's incredible in, and
Sure.
it's like a totally perverted version of
Yeah,
like
right,
the
yeah,
character from Training Day, who's kind of pretending to be the guy from The Siege, but is actually the guy from Training. Like,
manipulative.
I mean, it's just the greatest.
He's amazing. It is weird. It is, it's but you just get used to it. That's you almost get numb to his
spoiled.
amazingness,
Yeah,
because
you're
he's
totally
never
right.
less than like extraordinary in everything.
Yeah.
But so you just sort of obviously Denzel is astonishing,
Right.
But he really is
Right.
spectacular in this movie, and I think it's a really great character. But as you say, I think it is hard because he's so kind of. It's interesting because Denzel's able to this guy is basically perfect. He's like
Right.
morally impeccable.
It's
but
Die
he still,
Hard goes to Washington.
Yeah,
It's the
yes.
first thing I thought of.
But he still feels like a real person. He
Yeah.
doesn't
Totally.
feel like a symbol
Yeah.
or a cipher for the filmmaking or the brain trust political views. He still feels like still feels somewhat flawed and human, even though his actions are always like absolutely perfect.
One thing that's pretty, in thinking about it now that I like about this movie is there isn't the scene where he goes home to a wife and like helps his kids
you never
do
see it.
homework. Yeah, you don't see it. And like this movie's not concerned with that at all. And actually like it's weirdly refreshing. Like that we don't know anything about his personal life. He's just there. And a complete credit to Denzel
Right.
for creating an interior
The
life.
thought didn't even occur to me.
Right.
That you feel like you know this character. And there is a scene where Annette Bening's character gives a kind of summary of his, a resume-based summary of like, he was captain of this and da-da-da-da.
He was a
and,
veteran, right?
I don't know if she
think
says
I think
maybe.
he says it to Willis, but that's really all we know about this guy,
Yeah.
right?
But he just seemed like the guy that was always like captain of this team and a leader and was like played within the rules but wanted to change the system from inside is sort of what Annette Bening's kind of pop psychology of him.
And I also think Zwick does something smart in casting the lead of Malcolm X in this role, just because that's my favorite Denzel performance. He's absolutely astonishing. But like, it's a smart casting decision because we have positive baggage with Denzel Washington, right? No, I don't think most people are like, oh, he really sucked in that. Like, I don't think it's a thing, right? So it's like he's using our relationship with Denzel as the sort of like character building, as opposed to feeling like we need to see him at home with his wife, Kathleen, and their two twins. Like the movie just doesn't need that, right?
Yeah,
It's already.
It is refreshing to not bother with that bullshit, frankly. There's no time as well. The way that there's other movies where that makes sense, like Ricochet or whatever, right? He has something to lose or to protect her, and it's usually a trope for the
and that movie's about humiliation.
The bad guy
revenge,
goes after the wife and kids at the end in the third act and blah, 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 which is a trope I'm pretty bored of, but happens a lot. This film takes place like Die Hard on a compressed timescale. They're sleeping at the office.
Right.
It's like he does that whole speech,
How
bring the
long
sleeping
is it?
bag.
A few weeks? That what we
It
think
feels like that,
Yeah.
right?
under a
Yeah.
month? Okay.
About a month, I would say. Yeah. I mean,
Okay, cool.
you know,
There's no time.
we've seen how much damage you can do to a country and its constitution in the space of about a month. So I think I think that scans.
Yeah, no, I think it makes sense.
Yeah.
Oy.
Yeah.
Let's talk about. Sorry. Go ahead, Jason. if you
No,
have
the
another
only
point
other
to
thing
make.
I wanted to add was that the one thing that I will say is that because he is such a character of such purity and righteousness, it does provide one interesting wrinkle in the sort of post 9/11 viewing experience, which is that terrific scene where he is sort of passionately briefing the field office. You mentioned it a bit ago, the bring your sleeping bags and all that sort of stuff. The nosebleed scene.
The
But
nosebleed scene's amazing.
One thing that he says though that I think is really fascinating is that he says this whole thing about he's talked to, to representatives of the Muslim community. This almost feels metatextual. They love this country as much as we do. They want these criminals brought to justice as badly as we do. But then that said, he's like, we're going to turn the heat up. We're going to go into every mosque and every market and every community center and da-da-da-da-da. And the way that it is staged and delivered, it feels like a sort of conventional action movie, rah-rah,
Tommy Lee Jones and The Fugitive.
Yes. And the thing is that with, again, the benefit of hindsight, we know that that's exactly what the NYPD and the FBI did in the wake of 9/11. And it fucking yielded nothing and basically just was a campaign of terrorism and harassment against a religious minority. And so to have that scene in this movie played as a go get 'em Denzel sort of moment now sits very oddly.
That's true. I agree with that. That was a bit where I was like, well, actually, I
Can I
don't know about
actually
this.
Can I, to that point, and I wrote this down, I forgot about it till now, as I wrote down, this movie has a Hollywood issue. And what I mean when I say that is that there's a moment earlier in the film where there's like a bunch of people in a line and they're all talking on the phone and like you hear one and then you hear the next and then you hear the next and then you hear the next. And like my thought was like, what if Paul Greengrass directed this scene, right? Like what if like...
Or Costa Garvis or
Costa Garvis, right?
What if, again, these sort of precedents that he cites.
That kind of like smoothness of that moment is so like embedded in like how you might even make a Hollywood comedy or that's like where the tension is. It exists in those moments where it's like, this is maybe one of the few movies we've watched on the show where I was like, I would take a 7-episode series called The Siege about this because directed by, Paul Greengrass or another like a Billy Ray, like a filmmaker who really like with, again, and like there are ideas in this movie that come up, but I think it's missing that density.
Yep.
I just wanted to ask you guys one other question, which we didn't cover in the main thing, but we can, before we pivot onto our section about the Annette Bening character, which was, you guys are both New Yorkers. How did you feel, that the character, pivoting through the Anthony Hubbard character as our guide through the city? How did you feel it plays as a New York movie?
I think it's quite a good one. Like I feel it did not feel like it was made like tourists the way that some even well-intentioned New York movies do. There are, for me, what it often comes down to are very small details that you note as a New Yorker that maybe no one else would pay attention to. And I was so hyper aware of the coffee cups in this movie, that they have those bagel cart coffee cups that every
Greek diner coffee cups that are ubiquitous. Like it's such a, I lived in Astoria for years. It's real, man.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, that's so really good.
So they
that
get
they
the
got
details
that right.
correct for you guys.
That detail.
That
the other one that
yeah.
really jumped at me now that I am someone who, like, my first several years in New York, we didn't have a car, and now we do. And the scene where they're going on that little car chase when they're chasing Asif Manvi, and they squeeze and scrape through those double parked cars. That is such a specific New York double parking tiny streets thing. I really liked that little flair in that sequence.
Because we're doing this, and forgive me, but another thing that this movie gets right. Do you remember when they all go out for drinks and they're dancing together?
Yep.
Yeah.
That is the ultimate Midtown personality-less bar. Like the place where you kind of are like, we have this awkward group of people.
Yes.
And we don't want to we don't want to bring people to like a real shithole bar that we love, but we also don't want to go to like Buffalo Wild Wings.
Right.
So let's go to like random sports bar on 36th and 7th.
Yes.
Right?
100%.
Like it gets that right. Like and that's not nothing, because like the 15 blocks in Midtown where you're like, where the fuck am I right now? Like it really gets.
Yeah.
God, I love New York City. Anyway, it really gets that right.
Does.
But I think that you're totally right, Jason. The cups, the bars, the culture, the downtown Bowling Green court area, like it understands that kind of world, and it doesn't break out of that except to go to Brooklyn, which it photographs beautifully. So
Deacons,
it's like the
baby.
hermetically
Fucking Deacons,
the hermetically sealed world of New York, of this New York, is an accurate representation of what New York is. Because these people aren't like, let's go to that new cocktail bar in the East Village. They're like, let's go to the place in 42nd Street and like drink have watered down.
I kind of love
like,
how awkward that scene is. You know,
it's
like,
so
by
awkward.
intention. You know,
good transition into Annette Bening's.
Perfect. Well, let's talk about the lady of this piece.
Whoa! Oh no, I stepped on Jason's line. Let's say it again.
Oh, sorry. I'll take the cue. Okay. I'll take the cue.
Let's talk about the lady.
Whoa! She's a lady.
It's crazy. These like really like cringe lord bits that we did once, and then it just sort of became baked into the fabric.
We're
of the show.
The worst. Anyways, go ahead.
So Annette Bening as CIA operative Elise Kraft, aka Sharon Bridger, right? I think is her alter ego, or we're not sure which is the real name. I think she's fantastic in this. I think she's like, it's one of actually her best performances. And she's done a lot of amazing work. And the next year she was nominated for an Oscar for American Beauty. But I love her character, and I think she's really morally complex in an interesting way. And it's a key differentiator between this largely you made the point, like, as you said, like I was saying that Anthony Hubbard is essentially kind of morally impeccable, but there are things I'd sort of forgotten about that scene where he's like, basically bring the bulldozers in and let's, kick ass. And you're like, with complete cultural insensitivity or whatever, that, maybe is a little bit of a fly in the ointment there for that character.
Pain in the ass.
Exactly. Monkey in the wrench. But the Annette Bening character, by intention, obviously, is like, well, because he's FBI, so he's basically, his moral is more simple.
Yes.
CIA, much more complicated, and much less less overt about her intentions and her agenda and all the rest of it. So, what are you guys? Let's start with Jason. What are your thoughts on the Annette Bening performance and the character?
I mean, I think the character, you're right, is very complicated, and this is an actor who knows how to seize those complications and convey them in, I think, really interesting ways. I was also really struck, and maybe just because I've been thinking about this a lot lately, because you guys talk about this with Bruce a lot, I was watching her think a lot in this movie, and she's doing some great watching her think acting. And the moment specifically that leaps to mind is when they're out at the bus that blows up, and where she's looking around, clocking the choppers. Oh God, they're not here to negotiate. They were waiting for the cameras. They want everyone watching. Like, beautiful, great line, beautifully delivered. The slut-shaming stuff that they have everyone, including Denzel, do, I think is pretty gross. I don't think that, certainly she, has perhaps compromised herself a bit by sleeping with this particular person, but it's played for sort of cheap shots in a way that I didn't love. I also, maybe running counterintuitively to that, she's so sexy in this. Like the scarves. I know you guys like a scarf. The scarves, the leather jackets, like that leather jacket and scarf look that she's rocking in most of her scees is like,
she's powerful as well.
Very.
Like she is sort of
we
sexy,
love a powerful lady.
It's not the point of the character, even though she does have a sexual life as portrayed in the film. But she comes across as just incredibly powerful and interesting, but at the same time, she's constantly being kind of roughed up and mistreated by Hub. But it speaks to, again, the symbolism of the movie, because Hub is constitutionally correct to be doing what he's doing. She, as a CIA operative, is not, because the CIA are not, by their charter, constitutional division, they are not supposed to operate domestically, right? And so he constantly wields that as like, I can basically shut you down any time I want, and she throws back, well, I can make a phone call and that will not be the case,
right?
Although she never ultimately does, because I think she actually does respect that division.
And to complement the movie's aware of these things in a way a lot of cops and criminals movies are not. Like, you feel like Denzel knows the Constitution. And Phil, I know you've said that, but like, it's very rare that a character is openly like, you're in violation of the Constitution. You know, like, he really knows what he's talking about.
Yeah, the scene where they're walking up,
critical.
Yeah, the scene where they're walking up that stairway and having an argument about whether like they have to have a warrant.
Yes,
like I like hearing that from my cop movie heroes occasionally. I like that recognition of that. It's nice.
That's what the whole movie is about. So Denzel Washington is someone that is the true believer in the Constitution of the United States.
Yep.
Right. And everything he does is driven by that. And it's about other characters trying to go, well, yeah, maybe not this bit though, because you know, we're under the gun here, right? And another character being, well, how about we just rip that page out so I can get this thing done, right? Sorry. Just banging the mic there in my enthusiasm. The Constitution matters.
You remember the Simpsons
we still live in a democracy. The last time
doesn't Homer use the Constitution as a napkin? And they're like, "Oh no, you just erased the part about cruel and unusual punishment or whatever." Like, it's very no. I think that's odd. That it's true. I think Annette Bening is great in this movie. I don't love. I mean, when I say this, I don't like this character, and I don't generally have that response. I'm just kind of like, yeah. But I think that's to her credit, right?
Absolutely.
I think
you
that,
don't
like,
trust her.
Not a criticism of
you don't
exactly.
You don't trust her, but you also believe she's highly competent.
Yes. Can I get on a soapbox about another movie that comes out around this time that has something similar going on that I love, which is 1997's The Peacemaker, which I think is just I love that movie. I think it's a lot more like in the book. Edward Zwick says it's not nuanced. I totally disagree. I actually think it's incredibly nuanced, especially in the portrayal of the villain. But one thing that is better about this movie is that they're different characters, right? Nicole Kidman's like an analyst. She's like a Jack Ryan, but she's very sort of like by the book and bookish, and she needs George Clooney to like shake her loose and like get her on the streets and shooting terrorists and whatever. And like, I think this movie does a better job of making the sort of female character, the antagonist to the main character. At times, The Peacemaker's like a screwball comedy. Bening is like prickly in this movie, right? And that's a good thing. Like, it feels
believable that she's morally like imperfect and like, you know, does things that even potentially sexually sacrifices herself in that sense to be like, well, if I have to sleep with this guy to get information or to cultivate an asset or whatever, it's part of my repertoire. And it makes it, to me, it was like a prefigured the Claire Danes character in Homeland, you know, in an interesting way.
That's really good.
You know, very
that's
flawed but well-intentioned CIA officer, right? The other thing that I really like about this movie, again, spoiler alert for 1998's The Siege, I love that it doesn't pull a punch at the end and she dies. Like, there isn't a scene where it's like, usually in these fucking movies, it's like we see her being wheeled into the ambulance and Denzel goes, well, you're going to make it, you know, and you have that
she
bullshit,
waves
right?
feebly from the back of the ambulance.
And they say something poignant with her voice trembling and say, we did it and we saved America. Yes, we did. Off you go. See you at the hospital, love. It doesn't do that. It's like, no, she straight up fucking dies and sacrifices herself for the greater good.
The stomach. Like, she goes out.
That scene's amazing.
Terribly.
It's amazing. Her acting in that scene where she's going, shoot him. You really believe that that's like, she's ready to die. You know, the situation's got that bad. She's fucking awesome in this, man. She's so good in it. I think it's a great character. I love that she is a morally shades of gray.
You guys are making me like this movie more.
Listen, it's a great... as an action thriller with a political element, it is really, really strong. There are things that, and the idea of it is, that was an original idea, like martial law on the streets of the US. Okay, that's with a big filmmaker and some big stars. That's a movie I want to see. That's an interesting issue to explore, you know, just on the macro.
We can transition into our next,
let's
to
move
villains.
On to
but I think what's interesting is I recall now a buddy of mine who I saw a lot of movies with, when this movie came out, him being like, oh, it's going to be good. Bruce Willis is the general. And I bring that up because I think the movie was almost marketed as Bruce Willis as the protagonist, like coming to fix New York. I feel like in America, it was marketed as like a Bruce Willis movie, which of course he's a couple of years after Armageddon, right? And it's not
Same year.
Same
right,
year, right?
It's right on top of that, massive crushing that in that summer. he's huge, you know?
And I just remember it kind of feeling like this to me is an interesting start of a certain era of Bruce Willis's career. But I remember people like my friends being excited that there was like a Bruce Willis movie about him getting terrorists, which interesting to think of. This just kind of occurred to me.
That's such a great point, because it does kind of like make a bit of a false promise to the sort of there's a term that is thrown around in Hollywood where it's like a red meat movie, which is another way of saying kind of a programmer, right? Like throw some red meat at 'em. Right, you'll see some actor you like fucking dudes up, basically.
Right. Like Lone Survivor,
15 million
is a red meat movie, I would think. Like Lone Survivor,
maybe so. But I'm thinking more, the John Wick ripoffs or the Liam Neeson type movie. Essentially that type of thing. Where it's like not necessarily. I know what you mean about, because Lone Survivor is an interesting one, because what I do like about it, and it's interesting, let's talk about this for a second, because the other filmmaker that I was thinking about was Pete Berg. Who did, a similar movie, The Kingdom, which also tries to have, I think, to its credit, and I'd have to pass through the politics of that one, but what I do remember is that had a very sympathetic Muslim character policeman that was working with Jamie Foxx and the FBI team, who's a brilliant actor. I can't think of his name off the top of my head, but it's similarly trying to explore the same things. And Lone Survivor, I think, to sort of defend it for a sec, does have a scene where Mark Wahlberg, who is totally desperate by the end of it, is saved by the Afghanis that are not part of the Taliban and stuff. So I think at least Pete Berg tries to, whilst his films can sometimes be very like Michael Bay-esque with flag fluttering, let's show American military kicking ass. I think he's also tries to at least have some sort of fair balance and portray these characters in a balanced way. But you're totally right. That's such a great point. I hadn't thought about the fact that most people are probably thinking, Bruce Willis as a general bringing down terrorists, sign me up. And it's not.
It's red meat.
It's not that. So it's actually a bit of a.
It's a brilliant
lectures in this movie.
It's misleading. But I don't think. It was an unintentional subversion, because Ed Zwick didn't want him in the movie.
Right.
He was forced on him by the studio. So let's talk about this character of General William Devereaux.
This is not my favorite Bruce Willis performance.
I love this Bruce Willis performance.
Do you?
I do.
Oh, that's great.
I really do.
Because, to me, he's just had his, Armageddon. Bruce Willis doesn't just save fucking Nakatomi Plaza. Right. He saves the universe. He saves the planet, excuse me. And to me, there's this thing that he accomplishes 2 years later in Sixth Sense that's so impressive. What I describe as the half-closed eyes Bruce Willis, where it's all very grave. And I'm being a little reductive here.
Sure.
And I think I think Bruce Willis looks incredible in this movie. He has the right look. He looks good in the suits. He's a babe. He's entered this middle age period of his career where he's kind of he's put on 10 pounds, but it's muscle. Right. So he just looks bigger and
incredible
scarier.
in that uniform.
And he looks incredible in the uniform. And I actually think there's something to, I believe him when he says I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
But I don't fully feel that he's totally committed. And actually, Zwick says in the book that he didn't know his lines. And I don't know. It's just it never quite catches on fire as a performance for me. And I love Bruce.
Yes.
But Jason, please go ahead, because you said you loved it, and I'm really curious to hear that.
Well, I think, honestly, it is to his credit that he doesn't catch on fire. I think he is keenly aware of who the star of the movie is and what his job in the movie is. And I think that is frankly something that is really present throughout the filmography, that whenever he's doing the supporting roles, these small roles, he's not trying to come in and be Bruce Willis, the movie star, and take the movie away from the lead. I think this is not a movie that has anything else in common with this movie but Bruce Willis. But when you look at something like Nobody's Fool, he made that movie because he wanted to act with Paul Newman. He took the union stand, the SAG minimum on it. He's not even billed in the credits. He's not in the advertising. He just wanted to act with Paul Newman. And so when he's in those scenes where he's playing a heel, he's perfectly fine to just play the heel. And I think this is a similar sort of situation. I think also, like, to be fair, I also really dig what they did with this character. I think that you have to look, we can talk all we want, and I agree with the idea that this is sort of Hollywood in a negative way, but there are also not a lot of Hollywood action movies that will have a character come in the way this one does, with not one but two scenes where he says, I don't want to do the thing that you're about to make me do. Here's what's going to happen. It's going to go poorly. Let's not do this. And then they do it anyway, and he does it. He follows his orders. I think that especially that scene with, like, in the sort of the corridors of power sequence, where he says the army's a broadsword, not a scalpel.
Yes, not a scalpel. It's a great line.
Great line. Great scene. Great, that I buy that he believes what he's saying in that scene, and that I buy that he's reluctantly doing what he has to do later, and then that he sort of gets sucked into it because power, that kind of power, corrupts. I don't know. I think it's a really solid, underplayed performance, and one of the things I've always admired about Bruce is that he's not afraid to underplay.
Fair enough. No, and you're actually making me like a little like emotional, because like I love Bruce Willis so much, and I think that like so much of what is going on here, the show is like to reconsider him as a true, in addition to a movie star, a real fucking actor
with a capital A,
and like one who's committed to the thing. And I think reputationally, it's like, oh, that's the guy from Die Hard, right? And it's like, he's so much more than that, and he's so much more interesting. He is a little bit following in that lineage of Gene Hackman, who we recently lost, and that like Matt Zoller-Seitz write-up was like, Gene Hackman didn't change.
Right.
Yeah. He didn't show up with like, gaining 45 pounds. I was watching Unforgiven last night, and I'm like, that's the same guy who played Lex Luthor in Superman, right? Willis may be remembered in the same way, maybe not with the same amount of acclaim, but with the same kind of like, oh, it's Bruce Willis, and yet he's Malcolm in Sixth Sense. He's John McClane in Die Hard. He's amazing in Moonrise Kingdom, right? He's in Fifth Element. All these things like.
Butch.
So I think that's a really good point, and I do think he really underplays, and I think he knows that it's Denzel's movie.
He does.
Yeah, it's such an interesting point, because that scene where they finally kind of go head to head at the end, you do feel like Bruce Willis probably he's in third gear and could go up to fifth if he wanted.
That's true.
Although virtually, a la, like, it doesn't get to the Crimson Tide level, when Hackman and Denzel really both are at full steam. Right. It doesn't actually do that. It lets Denzel be at full pace, and Bruce kind of backs off a little bit.
What I thought was really interesting about both of their performances throughout, and then especially in that last scene, the thing that I noticed about Willis is he, in all of the scenes up to then, he never raises his voice. If anything, when he's angry, he lowers his voice. He does that whispery, scary kind of thing that he can do so well.
Scary.
He doesn't yell until the very last scene when he is desperate and when he is losing the argument. That's when he raises his voice, when he says, I am the law right here, right now, da, 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 da. And Denzel, in turn, whispers back at him, says,
but that is a fascinating
give the
line.
Order. Make murderers out of these young kids. Do it. Give the order. Like, that's, the way that they counterintuitively use volume to take power back and forth from each other in that scene, I think is really
like
cool.
Hackman in Crimson Tide when he punches Denzel, and Denzel's response is to like pull it in.
Yep.
There's some similarity there.
Yep.
But they just picking up on that, what you said about that line, like, I am the law here.
Right.
Again, that to me is like absolutely crystalline core of the theme of this movie.
Yep.
It's and because Hub is saying, no, you're not.
Right.
It's really interesting that throughout the film, they're in situations where there's a bunch of heavily armed military soldiers and FBI go in and take them on.
Right.
Because they actually are on terra firma constitutionally and legally. And Hub believes that will protect him. But you'd also looking at it tactically, and you'd be like, I don't know, you know, like you've got, these are trained soldiers, but then the brilliance of that scene is like Denzel pointing out the humanity of the situation. They're not killbots,
right?
You know, they're kids in some, it's, so those are the kind of moments where you actually look at that as like a microcosm of the wider movie and say, there's like real brilliance here. You know, there are issues and there are certainly imperfections. But there's also like some really, really powerful, nuanced stuff alongside the stuff that's less subtle.
Sure.
Can I just... This feels like a blown away episode, Phil, where we start the episode and we're like,
this is the best movie ever.
And by the end, I'm ordering the 4K and like watching it like pretty regularly.
This is a good movie, you know. There's no doubt about that. It's a really solid movie. There are certainly issues with it, but one of those issues that we have to discuss now, which is less positive, I think, is the other villain of the piece, Samir Nasdi, played by Sami Bouajila. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Excellent performance, I think, excellent actor. But I was really disappointed because I was like, when it was like, oh, a Palestinian character who's like sympathetic and dimensional. Oh, that's cool. But then, oh no, he's just
turns
totally
out
evil. Turns out he's Satan.
Right.
And you know, here we go again.
And this was very controversial at the time, so I'm not breaking new ground here. But maybe the most offensive, problematic moment in the movie is when he washes his hands before he reveals himself. Like, that is the reveal that he's the villain. And like, I don't know how else to say it. It's Islamophobic,
it's
right?
Super
like
loaded.
It's really it's a super loaded moment. The movie was criticized at the time. It may be the great criticism of the movie because this is a central tenet of the faith. Is to clean the body, is to do it after and before certain events. It's sort of what's the word? It's a holy act.
Yes.
And it's similar to, and the trailer for this movie was dinged for showing violence juxtaposed against prayer.
Yeah.
And it has the same effect. And I think that like it's similar to how sometimes
commingles them.
Commingles violence and faith.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's just gross, right?
Yeah.
And so it's similar to like when movies set in the Middle East use the sort of like, whoa, like the singing and the call to prayer as the music that defines, to frighten, to scare you.
Because it's other. It's like it's othering these characters. Yes.
Right. And in a character who's been introduced in, as I recall, like smoking in a bar, right? Like and like he's kind of like viewed as this like modern, maybe progressive, less dogmatic figure. Yeah. To have it kind of go this way is just like it's such a product of its time. Yep. And I think that if it were to happen now, the outrage would be even stronger, right?
Yep.
I think that's good performance hamstrung by that moment.
Agreed.
In my opinion.
I think it's absolutely fair. Let's move on to, we've discussed a lot, so we have to kind of move through here to our action section, which will be the last section of our tenets, because obviously we're not going to do the humor this week. It's not a laugh riot, this movie.
Tony Shalhoub is funny sometimes, I'll say that.
He just is naturally, he has a great instinct for humor and to make his characters warm and likable, as well as he's doing very serious work. But there's a number of really, really great action sequences in this film. I think the main one, one of the ones this film is largely remembered by and was marketed with, is the bus crisis situation, which is
really masterfully directed. I mean, just a really excellent example of a filmmaker building tension and release, relief and surprise. Like he really kind of plays the audience like a piano in that sequence. I think it's really strong.
Yeah, that one was excellent. And then there's some really big scale. There's a little bit of Philly special in that helicopter attack where Bruce Willis and co kind of go in guns blazing as they're trying to I can't remember the specifics.
Phil watching Bruce Willis in a helicopter is just like a big euphoric.
I could show you my notes, but I did indeed write down Philly special when that came up. So.
Amazing. There's also the finale in the bathhouse, which is a little bit more contained and intimate, but I think is a really it's kind of cool that it's such a big movie, big scale, broad strokes, big picture, big city, big situations, and then it ends with something quite contained and intimate, where the primary characters have to work together to solve it, and it's pretty kind of ugly, and they don't get through clean.
Can I say a very New York City thing that I appreciate about the ending of this movie? is that when they're tracking when they're tracking Hub, when the military is tracking him,
a great
they
sequence.
they show a map of they're at Cadman Plaza, which is 3 blocks from where I used to live on Henry Street, and that map is accurate.
There you go.
Like, it's accurate to the streets. There's a little bit of like a little pocket there. It's like, it's my favorite place I've ever lived in my life. So I paused it and I was like, I want to make sure that Clinton Street, like, they did their homework. This is not an interloper New York City movie.
There you go.
So it's like, it works really well in that scene. And I do appreciate that this movie has kind of an intimate ending, which is similar to The Peacemaker. It ends in a church.
Sure.
With a standoff between a couple of characters. So the best crisis is the best scene, though, I think, of the action.
It's one of the strongest bits. It's sort of horrible to watch, but at the same time, you kind of can't take your eyes off it. You know, it's really
Pit in your stomach thing.
Suspenseful. Anything else you guys want to say about this as an action? It is kind of an action movie. It's a political action thriller, I would say. Anything else you want to say about it on the action level before we move on to our awards?
I don't think so.
No.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Let's do it. Let's put on the old tuxedos.
I'm going to put on my camouflage uniform here, my tight-fitting camouflage uniform.
I'm going to look sexy in my leather jacket.
Your scarves.
Yeah, exactly.
What does that leave? What does that leave me with? I don't know.
You have a Brooklyn shirt on.
I've
You're
got my
doing great.
Brooklyn Dodgers shirt today. The Die Hard Oscars, aka the Action Movie Awards. The first, I picked 3, although there's a lot of great lines in the movie. Actually, it's there's some robust dialogue. One of the ones, and I think you kind of mentioned this sequence as the New Yorkers among us, when they're racing to get to one of the initial crisis, it might be the bus crisis, and Hub says, how soon can we get there? And Frank says, this time of day, maybe tomorrow.
Yeah. Good.
You know, which was like a very New York line. Frank has a lot of the best lines. Frank Haddad says, the 3 of you really do make a lovely couple, in reference to Elise and Samir. And but one that I thought was like brilliant was when they're talking about like the final kind of end game, and Elise says, "We're the CIA. Something always goes wrong." I thought that was like brilliant, because so often people who are like federal agents or are always like flexible. Well, we're the CIA. We know what we're doing, and you know they have a kind of swagger about them, and it was just such a sort of honest line. You know, for me that was one of my favorite. She says it sort of in a self-deprecating way, but that was just so truthful to admit, like, these situations are so booby-trapped and volatile and complex that the chances of it being, you know, a perfect, even the, you know, this was so much later, but even the Bin Laden raid, widely praised as one of the most perfectly executed, you know, on a purely, forget the morality of it, but like the military tactics, that one of the helicopters crashed.
Right.
You know, you know, so it's why, like, all but military people kind of understand this idea. Like, there's the expression of, you know, there's no plan survives human contact, essentially.
Yeah.
You know, so I thought, for me, that was like, those were the reasons why that was my favorite. But did you guys have a pick or another line that you liked the most in the movie?
Jason?
I mean, I feel like that entire speech that I read, some of the Denzel in the bathroom speech, is just like, you know, that whole little nugget there is pretty great. We mentioned the Army's a broadsword, not a scalpel. I also like Willis in that same scene. Says, make no mistake, we will hunt down the enemy, we will find the enemy, and we will kill the enemy. And no card-carrying member of the ACLU is more dead set against it than I am. That's
great line.
Good fucking writing right there. And then the only other one, and this is just like because it so keenly encapsulates the themes, is when Willis says, "Are you questioning my patriotism?" And Denzel replies, "I'm questioning your judgment."
Yeah.
Nice.
That's big Crimson Tide vibes.
Yeah, big time.
I think there's a couple lines that are really complicated and weird. One is, a woman will never understand the Middle East, which Bruce Willis says about Annette Bening. Earlier, he says it when they're in that room, which is this interesting line. At one point, Annette Bening says being a Palestinian is a profession, which is just like such a weird CIA kind of crazy bit. But my favorite, to bring a little levity to this, is when Shalhoub says, my people, the last of the unambivalent smokers. Which is just like...
And that's, as someone who's married to a Middle Eastern woman, I can testify. Like, it doesn't matter whether you're in a wedding or what situation, they are all going to be smoking.
Yeah. Well, it's also just like it gives it a little bit of breath of air. Like, you know what I mean? It's like he's really great.
He's amazing.
That's a really great. That's my pick. Is the last of the unambivalent smokers, personally.
And speaking of that, I only have one nominee. I never usually do this, but he for me is the only nominee for me. For the Hans Gruber Exceptional Thief Award for stealing the film is Tony Shalhoub as Frank Haddad.
That's a no-brainer, yeah.
I mean, he is so brilliant, so human. I love that he isn't perfect. I love that he does things wrong. His heart is in the right place. He's a he's a patriot. But at the same time, he's riding that line of the complexity between his past and his ethnicity and his newfound status as an American, but he isn't perfect.
Yep,
he's flawed, and I think it's an absolutely brilliant performance by one of our greats.
Yeah, and another time I think people would pay attention to this performance as like a great best supporting actor.
100%.
But it's just not. It's just that the juice wasn't there for these kind of movies then, and still really isn't.
Yep.
And then our last award, because again, for appropriacy, I'm afraid Marco is not been invited.
No more Marco.
No more table.
No more Marco.
No more table.
Next week we'll have him back.
All right.
So let's just wrap it up with the Dick Thornburg Award for Dick of the Movie. I only have two nominees, but again, feel free to add. Obviously, General William Devereux, played by Bruce Willis, but also Colonel Hardwick, played by the wonderfully named Victor Slezak, who I thought was like terrific in a small part. For anyone unfamiliar, he's the actor who appears when the FBI is first bombed and shows up very First Blood esque.
Yeah.
He's got like very much like when he arrives in First Blood with the beret and the military uniform and everything. Basically says initially he seems like a good guy. He's like, I'm here to help, and he asks what's your capacity, essentially, what's your kind of infrastructure, but then later he confronts Denzel with a horrible racist comment, which Denzel ingeniously diffuses, where he says like, don't get in my face, Hubbard, or I might just decide you're an Ethiopian. And Denzel says like, well, you're just stupid enough to believe that's an insult.
Amazing line. Victor Slezak plays the David Duke-esque character in last year's The Order, which is one of my favorite movies of 2024.
I'm really excited to watch this movie. You've been recommending it.
It's great.
I think he's excellent.
Good in that, like Goosebump City. He's a really good actor that I wish I'd seen more
He's worked a lot, and because I was curious because he kind of looked a bit like an older Craig Bierko. Like he has a great face. Bierko boys, rise up! We haven't done much plugging on our Negotiator episode, which I just re-listened to. We are insufferable with our plugging, of our Patreon. So we'll save it for the end.
www.patreon.com/48 hours of buddy movies.
But we will be doing Long Kiss Goodnight starring Craig Bierko. Do you have a pick out of those two guys or someone else you want to nominate?
I want to add, I don't think he's the winner of it, but I do think Asif Manvi, it's just sort of wild to see someone who we think of as such a comedic actor who we're so used to enjoying on The Daily Show and in sort of comic supporting roles, playing this role, which is 180 from all of that stuff. I thought he was quite good.
Very good.
But yeah, it's General Devereux.
I haven't had a chance to re-listen to his Mark Maron from a few years ago, but I believe he talks about being in this being his break in Hollywood a little bit. I think, but I don't want to misquote. But I think
he talks
has
quite a lot to do.
Yeah,
That sequence where they're chasing him down the street is very good.
Good stuff.
Yeah,
it's very good. French Connection vibes on that scene.
Very
a
much
bit
so.
Too.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
it's Slezak or it's Hardwick. He sucks in the best way.
I would pick him as well. Well, let's take one last break and then wrap things up with the Double Jeopardy trivia quiz where the scores can really change. We'll be right back.
Did you know 1 in 2 women wear the wrong foundation? Matching foundation is hard, but Il Maquillage makes it easy. Take the Power Match quiz to find a perfect match in seconds, customized to your unique skin tone, undertone, and coverage needs. With 600,000 5-star reviews, Woke Up Like This is our best-selling foundation for a reason. Available in 50 shades of weightless natural coverage. And with Try Before You Buy, you can try your full size at home for 14 days. Just pay shipping. Take the quiz at ilmaquillage.com/quiz. That's ILMAKIAGE.com/quiz.
Brace the rudders! Raise the sails! Raise the sails!
Captain, an unidentified ship is approaching. Over.
Roger. Wait, is that an enterprise sales solution?
Reach sales professionals, not professional sailors. With LinkedIn ads, you can target the right people by industry, job title, and more. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next campaign. Get started today at linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply.
And we're back with our last section of the show, the Double Jeopardy trivia quiz. I'm on the back foot now. Is Liam going to be?
How was it?
It was fucking fine.
I like the idea that it gets more high pitched.
Yeah.
Okay, obnoxious.
Yeah.
Okay, so Jason, you know the rules. 3 trivia questions.
Ready.
Collaboration is mandatory. So you guys can work together. Okay.
Ooh.
And you get 1 clue.
You better share information with me, Bailey.
I'm ready.
All right. Question number 1. This was the 3rd collaboration between director Ed Zwick and star Denzel Washington. What were the previous 2 films in which they collaborated?
Glory and Courage Under Fire.
Is correct.
I just want to say that I knew that too.
I love Courage Under Fire.
Movies.
I think Courage Under Fire is
I think
like
it's
maybe
fantastic.
Denzel's most underrated like 5-star performance. And one of the Ed Zwick's maybe aside from perhaps Glory. Like I love Courage Under Fire.
You know, Zwick is a avowed Kurosawa head, and you can see it. His movies have this kind of like thought. I mean, Kurosawa's my goat.
Obviously in Last Samurai, but yes.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But Courage Under Fire is Rashomon.
It totally is. Yeah.
You know, and that's why any movie that tries to be Rashomon, I'm like, Snake Eyes, which we will just have covered on the show. Like, I love movies that do that.
There's an episode of Guide for the Film Fanatic where director Scott Derrickson comes on and talks about Rashomon. And I talk at the end about Courage Under Fire. So there you go.
Yeah. That's a good episode. Scott Derrickson, great on that episode.
Great, smart, good guy.
Smart guy. Totally.
All right. Question number 2. Actors Lance Reddick and David Costabile both have brief parts in The Siege as an FBI agent and a fingerprint expert, respectively. Both Reddick and Costabile would go on to have much more prominent parts in which acclaimed HBO series.
The Wire.
The Wire, yes.
I know these ones are a little easy, but it was a hard week.
As soon as Reddick came out, because I haven't seen this movie since I watched The Wire, so that was a real yay! I was really happy to see him when he popped up here.
And it's cool when you see an actor that's gone on to have like a great career like David Costabile, like in that small part that's like, hey, I found the fingerprints. And you're like, oh, there is a path kind of thing. You know, like it's cool to see, you know, when people sort of start and like the old cliche of no small parts.
He's a good actor.
He's great.
Costabile.
He's great. And he's going to play
also, The
kind
Wire's good. I don't know if you guys have heard of it. It's a pretty good show.
Hot take over there from Liam.
Hot take.
Yeah.
Season 4, my favorite. Okay.
David Costabile will be coming up as a potential Dick of the Movie candidate in 13 hours. Coming eventually on Die Hard on the Blank. Last question.
Okay.
Question number 3. It's a little harder.
Wait, but I mean, because it's
convoluted. Corner. He knows the cues
What are we doing here, guys? Am I the only one listening to the show?
It's not super convoluted. That's the thing.
I have a convoluted. Well, no, I have a tough bonus one for the end of this.
Okay, we'll save it for that.
Go ahead, Phil.
All right. Bruce Willis also plays a general named Joe Colton, in which 2013 action blockbuster sequel.
2013. Okay, I mean, I have two possibilities, and I just can't remember the character name. So
you work it through together, guys. Work it to do the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire thing. That's what we're channeling.
First went to Red 2, but I don't know if he's a general in that.
Yeah, the other one that was in my head was the G.I. Joe: The Rise of Cobra, but I don't.
Oh yeah, has to be G.I. Joe: Rise of Cobra. Is it G.I. Joe: Rise of Cobra?
It's G.I. Joe Retaliation, the sequel.
Oh, the first one was called Rise of Cobra.
That's right.
Now it's convoluted, Phil. We got G.I. Joe.
We knew there was the sequel. We just didn't know what the name of the sequel was because we're not 13 years old. It's fine. We should have called out Powell. Lesson learned. Okay.
Fair enough. All right, Liam, you had a bonus.
What celebrated character actor who later appeared in Argo has one scene in this film as Corporal? He sits next to Colonel Hardwick.
Do you know this, Jason?
I don't.
I do remember scanning the cast list and seeing someone of note.
Do you want to call Al Powell?
Can we call Al for a clue? Yeah, let's call him.
He was a series regular on The Mindy Project.
Oh, is it Chris Messina?
Chris Messina has one scene sitting next to Colonel Hardwick, and I paused it and rewound it. I was like, that's Chris Messina, who's an actor I love. He's a great actor.
Yeah, he's terrific.
So I just thought
he was in a newsroom as well, right?
Was he? Okay,
he was. Yes, he was.
I loved that show. I loved the newsroom.
I did as well.
1 and 3, especially seasons 1 and 3.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's about it from us. Jason, thank you so much for coming. Is there anything that you've already mentioned it already, but like, here's your moment to have a few plugs if there's anything. What cool stuff you got going on?
Yeah, I do write a bit about the siege in my previous book, which is Fun City Cinema, New York City and the Movies That Made It. Actually, in the 9/11 chapter, in the chapter about film after 9/11, I wrote a bit about the siege's prescience and sort of resurgence after that event. But the new book, as we said at the beginning, is Gandolfini, Jim Toney, and the Life of a Legend. It's a full-length cradle to grave biography of the great James Gandolfini, and so far people seem to really like it and appreciate it, and it was a very, very difficult subject to write about because he was immensely private, did not give a lot of interviews even when he was with us, but I hope I did him justice.
What's the angle of the book? Because it's such a fascinating figure. Did you have a particular kind of point of view on it? Or?
I mean, for me, I came to it with an interesting perspective because I had clocked him in True Romance. Like in 93, I'm like, who the fuck is this guy? He's really special.
Same.
And so I was keeping tabs on him through all those intervening years. I'm like, there he is in Crimson Tide. There he is in Get Shorty, you know. And so when he got Tony Soprano, I was like, oh, yay, this great actor might become famous now. So really, that was kind of the perspective that I wanted to bring to it, was that this guy was a hardworking character actor who very well could have just grinded out a career doing, third under the title sort of roles and just have this unexpected fame thrust upon him by being a part of this phenomenon. And the extent to which that, made him rich and made him successful, but also kind of fucked him up personally, psychologically, and also then really sort of veered his career in ways that it might not have when that show ended and he was trying to make the public see him as not just that guy. Those were sort of the challenges. Mostly I just wanted to reclaim him as like a great actor, which everybody knows he was a great Tony Soprano, but I don't think even now he got at that time the credit for his incredible range and diversity and the different kinds of work that he wanted to do.
Well, speaking to that, I'm not a New Yorker like you guys, although I did spend a lot of time there in the aughts during my playwriting days, and I saw him on stage in God of Carnage, playing incredibly different character. With Jeff Daniels, as I recall, and another idea is occurring to me, and perhaps you might be interested in joining us for the episode where he plays a very different character in the Die Hard on a Blank movie, The Last Castle.
Yes,
he is absolutely brilliant in.
He is.
As a really complex and kind of sympathetic initially antagonist to Robert Redford's character. Great movie. I love that movie. I'm really excited to talk about that. The book sounds wonderful. And your podcast, again, for anybody that didn't catch it,
is Guide for the Film Fanatic. We did 2 previous ones. We did a Fun City Cinema podcast, which is like an audio documentary. There are 10 episodes of that. You can listen to that wherever. We did 100 episodes of A Very Good Year, where we invite a guest to pick their to pick their favorite movie years and their favorite films from that year, and we put all that in context. The new show is Guide for the Film Fanatic. It's available through the One Heat Minute Productions feed, and basically we ask each guest to pick one movie from Danny Perry's book, Guide for the Film Fanatic, which is a 1986 compendium of cult and classic and all sorts of different movies, and we spend an hour talking about that. It just launched a few weeks ago, so there are not a lot of episodes yet, but there will be more, including an upcoming episode with Mr. Liam Billingham, so we got that to look forward to.
Discussing The Fireman's Ball, Milos Forman's great subversive Czech new. I'm watching so much goddamn Czech new wave cinema over here. It's the best. It's the best. Thank you for inviting me on. I'm psyched.
Absolutely, it's going to be fun.
Psyched to do that. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you, Jason. We look forward to all of your forthcoming work, including the Die Hard book. And thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rate, Phil. Rate,
review, subscribe.
Find us on Blue Sky.
You can
find Jason on Blue Sky.
Oh yeah,
and we'll link him. We'll link to him down below. We're still on X. We're not on X. Leave us alone. That website sucks. You can email us at diehardoab@gmail.com. And if you really want to get in the chat, join the Patreon. Phil, the Patreon link is
I'm forgetting myself. Patreon.com/48 hours of buddy movies.
We chat away over there.
Good show.
Thank you.
Thank
you for subscribing.
Yeah, thank you.
Man, MVP guest.
Amazing. Just remind people about the website thing. Signing up
for the show on the Patreon website, not through the iOS app, because Apple has jacked up the prices on the iOS app considerably and made it more expensive to pay for the show. And that's not a one-time thing. That's a monthly fee. So go to www.patreon.com/48 hours of buddy movies to subscribe. Phil, next on this show, $5 a month or $7.50 if you want us to say your name.
I bypassed that. I'm a $5 one because you guys said my name today, so I figured that
one.
And
also, I think we did say your name
Work in the system. Work in the system. Circumventing
that's right.
He's got moves, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, however you do it, we're always grateful for the subscriptions. Jason, thank you so much. Next time on on our Patreon on 48 Hours of Buddy Movies is Stakeout.
Bottom boys, rise up!
A great movie.
My
a really
neighbor
delightful
is probably
movie.
like every 5 or 10 minutes, this guy sounds like one of Bane's guys from The Dark Knight Rises.
And next time on this show, as we touched on earlier, The Matrix.
Wachowski Warriors rise up! I don't know, but The Matrix.
That's pretty good.
Thank you. Incredible movie.
Some of these movies, I've got to say, like what we're about to do. By the time this comes out, we will have done it. We haven't recorded it now. But like we're doing RoboCop on the Patreon, and it's like intimidating. You know, like you're like. The Matrix, these kind of like giant juggernaut movies.
Well, you feel like there's nothing left to say about them because they've just dominated popular discourse for so long.
But that's where you're wrong, Jason. That's where you're wrong.
Also, the problem with RoboCop and its techno-fascism politics is that they're not relevant anymore. So it's like I just don't know really what I'm gonna say about a movie.
That's what's cool about sci-fi. Is like we're now living in the period that was predicted by films made in the 80s.
Yeah.
It's the year 2025.
Yeah.
The president is a reality star douchebag.
Right.
Like the Constitution doesn't exist. We're like, oh no, it's not. No, it's not The Running Man.
Yeah.
it's real life.
I'm trying to think of a Verhoeven something, but I don't got one. Anyway, Paul Verhoeven's the prophet.
I was gonna say as long as we mentioned the name, and so people can check that off.
Oh
the
yeah,
bingo
it took
card.
us to. Yeah. Jason, will you make the bingo card? We need someone to make this bingo card. We need it. All right. That's it.
Let's let you out of here.
Okay.
We'll be back next time.
There is no spoon.
Sure.
Well, I wasn't going to be like, there is no spoon.
Yeah. Why not? You didn't want to shout more?
All right, okay. There is no spoon. Die Hard on a Blank is a podcast from Philip Gothorn and Liam Billingham. Tyson Hubley makes our art. You can hear exclusive episodes of our Patreon show at patreon.com/48 hours of buddy movies. Rate, review, subscribe, and tell your action movie loving friends about the show. See you next time on Die Hard on a Blank.
The new Boost Mobile network is offering unlimited talk, text, and data for just $25 a month for life.
That sounds like a threat.
Then how do you think we should say it?
Unlimited talk, text, and data for just $25 a month for the rest of your life?
I don't know.
Until your ultimate demise.
What if we just say forever?
Okay.
$25 a month, forever.
Get unlimited talk, text, and data for just $25 a month with Boost Mobile forever.
After 30 gigabytes, customers may experience slower speeds. Customers will pay $25 a month as long as they remain active on the Boost Unlimited plan.
Does it ever feel like you're a marketing professional just speaking into the void? Well, with LinkedIn ads, you can know you're reaching the right decision makers. You can even target buyers by job title, industry, company, seniority, skills. Wait, did I say job title yet? Get started today and see how you can avoid the void and reach the right buyers with LinkedIn ads. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next campaign. Get started at linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
Hi guys, it's Phil.
And Liam.
From Die Hard on a Blank. And we're excited to talk to you about a brand new podcast we're launching called 48 Hours of Buddy Movies.
That's right, folks. 48-hour-long
approximately
episodes exploring 48 different buddy movies, beginning with the original classic that started it all, Walter Hill's 1982 masterpiece, 48 Hours, starring Nick Nolte and Eddie Murphy.
And just like Die Hard on a Blank, our new show will explore the influence of 48 Hours on the action genre, one buddy movie at a time.
We'll be covering iconic franchises such as the Beverly Hills Cop movies, the Stakeout movies, the Bad Boys movies, classics of the genre like Running Scared,
Hyams Hive Rise Up,
Midnight Run, Red Heat, Tango and Cash, The Hard Way,
plus tough thrillers such as To Live and Die in LA, Black Rain, Point Break, Training Day, and The Way of the Gun.
As well as a few wild cards that you might not expect, such as RoboCop, Alien Nation, and, of course, Phil's favorite,
Harley Davidson and the Marlboro Man.
So if you're a fan of two buddies talking buddy movies,
then 48 Hours of Buddy Movies is for you.
Visit patreon.com/48 hours of buddy movies to subscribe for the price of 1 cup of coffee a month.
See you in the squad car.
Or walking to the squad car, mildly irritated that we've been paired off.
Wherever. That's patreon.com/48 hours of buddy movies to subscribe.